Ach mafsidei hachasidus. What makes a person lose his capacity to be a chassid? What makes a person lose out in the madrega, in the level of avodas Hashem that we've been describing? And this is something that it's interesting that we're so far along in the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, but what we're about to see is something that we've seen a similar idea all the way in the beginning of the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim. It's like a common thread. Ach mafsidei hachasidus heim hatirdos v'hadaigas. What are tirdos and what are daigas?
Daigas are worries.
Daigas are worries, and tirdos. What? Tirdas are things that you're busy with, you're tarud and you're busy with. In other words, tirdas, when a person is tarud, it's legitimate things that a person is tarud, and he has his parnasa, or his shidduchim, or his shalom bayis, or his chinuch of his children, or taking care of his house, or all the different things that a person has to be busy with, and they make a person tarud. They're tarud. The Gemara describes that the night of a chasana is pater from Kriyashma. We don't pass in that way, by the way, because we don't have kavanah anyway. But a chasana is pater from Kriyashma because he's tarud b'mitzvah. He's engaged. He's distracted. So it's like an oisik b'mitzvah pater b'na mitzvah kind of thing. That's tarud. Daiga is worries that it's not part of my doing something. In other words, if I'm busy doing something and I'm not tarud, that could be a problem. If you go to a chassid and he says, the Gemara says you're tarud, I'm not tarud, I'm good. Like, maybe you should think about what you're doing a little bit more. Like, you're getting married, you should be tarud. You should be engaged and distracted by what's happening. Daiga is, I worry, there's a war in Iran, I'm worried. Is there anything I can do about it right now besides for Davin? Right now, right here, is there anything I can do besides for David? Try to work on my own Yirah Shamayim? There's nothing I can do, but I could sit and twiddle my thumb and worry. That's daigas. But we all have our daigas. We have the things that distract us because they worry us or they upset us. Ki b'hiyos ha-seichel tarud v'nechbaz. When the seichel of a person is distracted and gripped, b'da'agoysav u'be'asakav, in his worries, and in his business and all the things that he's busy with, it's impossible to think the thoughts, the very calm and thoughtful things that a person needs to think about their avodas Hashem, to remind you of something that it says all the way in the beginning of the Sefer, that Mesilas Yesharim says a guarantee that if a person would take time to think, it's impossible to not get better. When people think, they improve. It's such an unbelievable testament to the goodness of the heart of a Jew. When people take time to be misbainin, they do better. The problem is that we don't take time to be misbainin. In our generation, it's interesting because it used to be that things took so long that people literally didn't have time to think. Just getting food was an issue. You know what it took to bake a loaf of bread? You know what it took to do laundry? You know what it took to keep a house running? No running water. We live much better than royalty of a few hundred years ago, right? So we have plenty of time on our hands, do we? You feel like you have plenty of time on your hands? We don't really, because we have these. These take our time away. Our technology, our Kadosh Baruch Hu always balances things out, because this is the challenge of life, taking time to be thoughtful and to think and to be misbainin and to contemplate. When you take some time to think about, where am I headed? What am I doing? What's this all about? Positive things come out of those conversations with yourself. People make positive decisions based on that. But how often do we actually sit down and have those conversations with ourselves? So as soon as the Yetzer Hara saw that life was getting easier and easier, and I was starting the day yesterday in Connecticut, and in the middle of the day went to New Jersey, and wound up back in New York, and I was able to do all of that in one day, and if it was a few hundred years ago, it would have taken several days. So I have plenty of time on my hand. HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged that there are other things to distract us. And that's a challenge for us. It's a challenge of the world that we live in. Umibeli hisbainanus lo yasig hachasidus. Without being thoughtful, a person will not be able to be a chassid. Just rushing ahead to do never leads to chasidus. You end up doing thoughtless things. When people do thoughtless things in the name of chasidus, it turns out to be the opposite of chasidus. Va'afilu hisigoi kvar, and this is the challenging thing. Even if a person reaches chasidus, hine hatirdos, the different worries that a person has, machrichos es haseichel. They like force the seichel away from his thought process, and they confuse him. They do not allow him to strengthen himself in yira and ava. And if you've been keeping track, yira and ava are the midos that he said we need to be thinking about in order to be a chassid. He said earlier. Ubisharha inyanim, and in the other areas, hashayachem el chasidus kasher zacharti, that have to do with chasidus, as I mentioned. This is a very hard thing. I was just telling a close friend last night when I was on the phone while I was driving back here that, I try to think from time to time about myself. I try to think about where I'm up to and what I'm doing, and how I could overcome different challenges that I have and different struggles, and how I could do better if I feel like I did not overcome a challenge. How can I do better? I do try to think about these things sometimes. And sometimes after I think about it for a while, I reach a certain clarity, like where I am. I'm sure you have the same thing, like what I should be doing. And also like how to think about myself in a healthy way. And how to relate to the different responsibilities or things that I have to do. And I develop, I try over time, sometimes from talking to people, sometimes from talking to myself, to develop a certain, mahalach, a certain way of thinking about myself. The problem that I suffer from is that when life is going in its regular way, so I can sometimes hold on to that. In other words, I can go to sleep one night and wake up the next day and continue this approach or this way that I'm thinking about myself. Sometimes I can do that. I don't blank out. But when something happens that's a little bit of a disturbance to my regular, predictable schedule, I lose my train of thought about myself. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I lose my own self train of thought. So let's say if I'm here in this man, and I'm learning with you guys, and I have my responsibilities at home, and I have my responsibilities in my shul, and I have a lot going on, but I'm thinking about myself, I'm speaking to people I get advice from, I'm talking things over with my wife, and I have a certain sense of myself, like who I am, and what my job is, and what I'm doing, and I'm not trying not to be too hard on myself, I'm also trying not to be too easy on myself. You know the struggle, right? I'm working on that. And then I go to Eretz Yisrael for a few days for yeshiva. I travel to Eretz Yisrael, I run around Eretz Yisrael, as you know, and I come back home. I often don't remember where I was. I don't remember my thought process. I don't remember to ground myself, and it sometimes takes a few days, or even slipping a few times in areas that I need to be careful about, until I remind myself to be thoughtful about where I'm up to. I have this with Purim. Purim is a wonderful, holy day, but it's a disturbance. You know what I mean? It's a disturbance in the way that you think about yourself and you think about your life. And then when you go back to normal civilian life after that, I think it's important for us to remember that we need to consistently be thoughtful. And that means you go away for a few days and you come back, you take a little walk with yourself. And you just try to remind yourself, why am I here? What am I doing here? You know, guys choose to come to this yeshiva because they want to be connected to learning, even when they start school, right? Why else would someone want to come to the insane schedule that is Lander College? Why would someone do that? People are doing that because they want to stay connected to their Yiddishkeit. It's the only reason, right? That's why we're here. But then sometimes we get so busy here that we forget that that's why we're here. And I'm not saying this in a cynical way. This is the fact. We get so caught up and busy that we're here It happens in Eretz Yisrael also, by the way. People go to Israel because they want to grow. But they get so caught up in going to Israel that they forget that they wanted to grow. Okay, Baruch Hashem in Eretz Yisrael, the Rabbeim and everything, they keep reminding us. Right? They don't let you forget, you know? But when you're going through things, you get thrown off and you forget why you're doing what you're doing, and you could have made a decision to do something for the best reasons, and then when you're in it, you lose sight of those reasons, and you end up, like you'll get married, and you decide you're going away, you're going to Europe for 2 weeks with your wife to build your relationship. And then you end up in Europe spending more time on your phone, God forbid, than with your wife. What happened? Are you stupid? For that you had to spend $2,000 on a ticket and travel to Europe? You could have been on your phone at home. What's the pshat? Why are we so stupid? We forgot. It sounds silly, but it's 100% true. We forget. We lost our thought process. We forgot the underpinnings of why we're here. And if we would remember that, we'd be able to stay more loyal to it. We build something and then we forget why we're building it. The guy gets married, all he wants is to have a beautiful relationship. But sometimes he gets lost and he forgets about the relationship. You know what I mean? And the same thing is true with Avodas Hashem. We want to grow. We want to be close to Hashem. It's not just that it's hard. It's not just the Yetzer Hara. I mean, maybe it's also the Yetzer Hara, It's that we forget. We simply forget. When you're davening Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, there's a certain element of like, how did I forget? This is what's important. It's not that I lost the struggle with the Yetzer Hara. That's a separate thing. We simply forget. We're here for a reason. We just forget about it. Why do we forget about it? Because we're distracted. We're programmed to forget. And that's why we need to be thoughtful. That's why this Seder is so important. That's why just learning and the fact that we sit around in the morning and we schmooze about stuff is super important, because it just reminds us. And we need to remember. That's what he says, Al Kain Amru Zechreinu Levracha. And that's what Chazal said. Ein Hashchina Shaira. That the Shechina does not rest. Listen to this taich of the pasuk. You always thought this was like a Hasidic Chazal. Listen to how he taiches it. Pashut Pshat. The Shechina doesn't rest. Lo mitach atzvos, not when you are sad. V'lo mitach atzvos, and not when you're lazy. V'lo mitach schayk, and not when you're laughing. V'lo mitach kalos reish, and not when you're being lighthearted. V'lo mitach dvarim b'teilim, and not when you're busy with silly distractions. Ela mitoich dvar simcha shel mitzvah. Only the Shechina rests when a person is involved in the joy of doing a mitzvah. What does that mean? So we always think it's some kind of a heebie-jeebie kind of the Shechina rests when I'm busy with a mitzvah. He's explaining it in a very simple way. That when I'm involved in the distractions and I'm sad or depressed or busy or lazy even. Think about it. Half the time we don't think it's because we're lazy. We sit and do nothing. We sit and space out. We won't think. The person goes into the shower. There's no place better to think than in the shower. You're completely alone. You can think. And we space out. And you go onto a bus or an airplane, and you space out. And you're bored, right? How many times have you sat on a plane bored? I want to tell you something. By the great Balei Musar, there are people that won't go anywhere without a sefer. They've been to DMV with a sefer. They're on the train with a sefer, and that's great. That's wonderful. It's tremendous hasmaga. By the great Balei Avodah, there was a taina on those people. You have nothing to think about. If you're not looking at something, you have nothing to think about. There's a story that Rav Aaron Kotler once came to a convention, a meeting of great Talmidei Chachamim, and he was holding a Mishnah Berurah written by the Chavetz Chaim. In fact, there's a famous picture of Rav Aaron Kotler holding a Mishnah Berurah, like the black Mishnah Berurahs. Remember those old black Mishnah Berurahs? Not
to modern day.
And Rav Hutner met him holding a Mishnah Berurah. He's such a masmid, right? And Rav Hutner said, Rav Aaron, this is a masmid, you're a masmid. He was making fun of him. He's like, you have to travel with the sefer every second, you have nothing to think about. And Rav Aaron said, Chas v'shalom. It's just that when I go to a meeting of Talmidei Chachamim to plan how to be manhig Klal Yisrael in America, I want to have the schus of the Chavetz Chaim with me. But we tell ourselves, no, we're more sophisticated than that. We don't have to walk around with a sefer. Instead, we stare at our phones the whole time. I don't know if that's more sophisticated. It might be a little less sophisticated. Like, if we're not going to be thinking, at least we should be doing something productive. But the truth is, we spend time. You're in the DMV. You're online in the supermarket. Take time to think about something, and it's hard because you have to discipline yourself. But like, let me think of where am I holding? Imagine you did that sometimes. Where you do it?
I do it too often.
Yeah. Where am I holding? Where am I holding? What you need to do is, and what's the plan for today? Not what you do, which is what should have been the plan for yesterday.
Right. That's right.
Right?
You know well. Yeah.
Just sometimes the safer go to public, so you're not like looking around and preach whatever, so your eyes are.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying there's no reason to do it, and I go with the safer a lot of times, and that's But I'm just saying that like there's such a thing as using time in a beneficial way, even though other people around you might not be able to tell. But just like you get onto that airplane and you're waiting for takeoff, you're just like losing your mind from boredom. Stop. You have a few minutes and think. Ethan, like, okay, where's Ethan up to? What's the plan? Wherever you're flying to. It's going to be when you get there. What are you doing to make Hashem proud of you? You don't think it'll be a change, at least that day, if you have that conversation with yourself? You're so busy, you can't do it. We get distracted. We get lazy. We get busy. He says when a person's involved in the simcha of a mitzvah, a person is focused to be able to think about his responsibility. And kol shekein ha'hanois v'hatanugim, of course, when we indulge in all the luxuries of life, that we get distracted. Sheheim hefchi mamish ala chasidus. They're mamish the opposite of chasidus. Ki neheim mifatim alev. They seduce the heart. When we're in luxury, it's very hard to think in a proactive, productive way because we're in the mode of laying back, of not doing, of taking care of ourselves, not thinking about who we have to take care of. Limoshech achareim, to be drawn after them. V'sar mikol inyane aprishus v'ayediyah ha'amitas, and a person turns away memela from all inyanim of precious, of separating himself from gashmias and from true yediyah. Unbelievable. Let's give it a shot today. Let's try to think a little bit. Who knows what will happen? Thanks for Hashem.
Oh, Rabbi, I got it.